Good evening. You don't need to focus on anything right now, because there is nothing here that requires attention. This is simply a quiet science story, told slowly, and you can let it play gently in the background without needing to stay awake to understand it. If your thoughts drift, that's completely fine, and if you fall asleep before the story finishes, that's exactly how it's meant to work. Tonight, everything moves gently. Nothing is rushed, and nothing changes quickly. And you might notice your breathing begin to slow without trying to change it, without needing to control it, simply allowing it to settle on its own. This is not a lesson. There will be no questions to answer and no conclusions to reach. Only calm, steady descriptions of how things exist exactly as they are. If at any point you stop listening, the story will continue without you, because it doesn't depend on your attention, and it doesn't ask for effort. For now, just let your body rest wherever it happens to be, letting your shoulders soften and your jaw relax, knowing there is plenty of time and nothing needs to happen next. And as the sound of this voice continues, you can simply remain here, comfortable, quiet, and at ease, as the night carries on. The ocean covers most of the surface of the Earth, and from space, it appears as a single, continuous body of water, stretching around the planet without clear borders, not evenly shallow, with many places where the ocean floor lies far below the surface, deeper than the height of the tallest mountains above sea level. This depth is not dramatic or sudden, but simply a result of how the Earth's surface formed over very long periods of time. Most of the ocean exists beyond the areas we regularly see, as coastlines, waves, and shorelines represent only a thin edge, while the majority of ocean water lies farther out, where the surface remains relatively calm and the distance to the sea floor increases gradually. Reaching these deeper regions has always been difficult, not because they are dangerous by nature, but because they are far away and require time, equipment, and careful planning to access. Which is why much of what we know about the deep ocean comes from indirect observation rather than constant human presence. Despite this distance, the deep ocean is not separate from the rest of the planet, as it remains part of the same global system where movements at the surface, such as wind and temperature changes, eventually influence deeper layers, often slowly and gently. The water itself remains mostly stable, with temperature changes becoming smaller as depth increases, and conditions shifting less frequently than they do near the surface, making this stability one of the defining features of the deeper ocean environment. It is also important to remember that the deep ocean is not empty or a void, but contains water, dissolved gases, minerals, and living organisms adapted to these conditions, existing quietly and consistently without altering the calm nature of the environment. The scale of the ocean can be difficult to imagine, not because it is mysterious, but because it extends beyond everyday reference points. And depth in this context does not imply falling or sinking, only distance from the surface, measured steadily and evenly. As this story gently moves away from the surface, nothing sudden occurs. There is no sharp boundary and no moment where the ocean becomes something else, as the water remains water and the environment remains continuous. There is no need to picture this movement clearly or visualize details, as the descriptions can remain in the background, passing by without requiring attention. Because the ocean does not change its behavior based on whether it is observed, and continues in the same way regardless of who is listening. And as these simple facts settle in, there is no need to hold on to them, as they can drift gently, just as the deeper layers of the ocean do, slowly and without urgency. As the distance from the surface increases, one of the first changes that occurs is a gradual reduction in light. Because sunlight does not disappear suddenly in the ocean, and there is no clear moment where brightness ends. Instead, light becomes weaker, layer by layer, as it moves through the water. This happens because water absorbs light, with the different wavelengths absorbed at different rates. So colors that carry less energy, such as reds and oranges, fade first, while higher energy colors, like blues, travel slightly farther. This process is steady and predictable, independent of the time of day or whether the water is calm or moving, simply reflecting how light behaves when passing through a dense medium like seawater. Near the surface, light remains abundant, reflecting, scattering, and moving easily. But as depth increases, these reflections soften, shadows lose definition, and visibility gradually diminishes. Eventually, the ocean reaches a point where sunlight is no longer strong enough to support clear visibility, forming what is often described as a transitional zone. Not because it is dramatic, but because conditions shift slowly within it, with light still present yet diffuse, objects appearing less sharp, contrasts fading, and the environment becoming more uniform with fewer visual details. Beyond this depth, sunlight no longer plays a significant role, and the ocean does not become dark suddenly, but instead grows evenly dim and then gradually darker still. This darkness is not an active force that moves or spreads, but simply the absence of light caused by distance and absorption, a stable condition that does not signal danger or emptiness and remains largely unchanged over long periods of time. In these deeper regions, the lack of sunlight means that daily cycles of light and dark no longer shape the environment. There is no sunrise or sunset to track, and time passes without visual markers, so the deep ocean is not governed by rapid shifts, and changes occur slowly, often over years or longer, allowing the environment to settle into a consistent state. For the purposes of this story, there is no need to imagine complete darkness or picture anything at all, as the fading of light can remain abstract, a simple description rather than an image, with nothing in this process requiring attention, no moment to watch for, and no threshold to cross. The water continues to surround everything evenly. The environment remains continuous, just as it was closer to the surface. And as light becomes less relevant, other conditions stay stable, with minimal temperature changes, slow movement, and nothing happening quickly. This gradual fading does not mark an ending, but simply one step in moving farther from the surface where external influences grow weaker. And as these descriptions continue, they do not need to be followed closely, passing by quietly and without effort, as the sense of depth increases and the environment becomes more uniform, calm, and unchanging. As light becomes less relevant, another condition gradually becomes more noticeable, though this change is not visible and does not announce itself. And that condition is pressure. Water has weight, and as depth increases, the amount of water above any given point also increases, creating pressure that builds slowly and predictably with distance from the surface. Pressure in the ocean does not arrive suddenly, but increases in a steady way at roughly the same rate throughout the water column, with no jumps or breaks, as each additional layer of water adds a small, consistent amount. This pressure is not directional, meaning it does not press downward in a single line, but is applied evenly from all sides at once. And this uniformity is important because it means pressure does not feel like weight, does not push or pull, and simply exists as a surrounding condition. For objects and organisms adapted to depth, this pressure is not experienced as strain, as their structures are shaped to exist within it naturally, with no resistance taking place and only balance. Materials behave differently under pressure, with gases compressing, liquids remaining largely unchanged, and solids responding based on their structure, all following well-understood physical principles that remain consistent regardless of location. Because of this consistency, the deep ocean environment is not unpredictable, and once pressure reaches a certain level, it remains stable without fluctuating from moment to moment, contributing to the overall calm of the deep ocean. Without rapid changes in light and without sudden shifts in pressure, the environment settles into a steady state, and temperature follows a similar pattern. As near the surface, water temperature can change quickly due to weather and sunlight, while at greater depths, these influences fade and temperature becomes uniform, changing only slightly over long distances. Movement also slows, as waves and surface currents lose their energy with depth, leaving behind slow, gradual motions of water that move so gently they are often difficult to detect. Together, these conditions create an environment defined by consistency rather than activity, where nothing responds quickly and nothing requires immediate adjustment. And pressure in this context is simply part of the setting, not dominating the environment or competing with other forces, but existing alongside them, quietly and continuously. It is also important to remember that pressure itself does not cause harm, as harm occurs only when there is imbalance, and in the deep ocean systems are already balanced, with everything present adapted to the surrounding conditions, which is why the deep environment does not feel harsh, but settled, remaining the same from one moment to the next. There is no reason to imagine tension, compression, or strain here, only a consistent physical state that has existed for very long periods of time. As the distance from the surface continues to increase, pressure continues to rise at the same steady rate, with nothing new introduced and nothing unexpected appearing. And for the purposes of this story, there is no need to track numbers or compare measurements, as the exact values are not important, and what matters is the pattern of gradual change and stable conditions. These descriptions do not require attention and can remain in the background like a low, steady sound. And if they fade from awareness, nothing is lost, because the deep ocean does not respond to whether it is being noticed, and its conditions remain the same regardless of observation, as pressure, temperature, and movement settle into their steady forms, and the environment becomes increasingly uniform, quiet, and unchanging. As conditions become more stable with depth, scientists describe the ocean in broad layers, not as walls or boundaries that separate one environment from another, but as a way of describing gradual changes over distance, with each layer blending into the next so smoothly that there is no moment where one ends and another begins, and the water remains continuous throughout. The first of these deeper regions lies below the surface waters where sunlight is still present, though already softened, no longer defining clear shapes. And the environment begins to feel more uniform, with fewer visible differences. This layer is often described as a middle region, not because it is centered, but because it marks a transition between surface influence and deeper stability, where changes occur slowly and nothing shifts suddenly. Below this, the ocean enters a region where sunlight no longer plays a role. Yet the absence of light does not alter the physical nature of the water, as temperature remains steady, pressure continues its gradual increase, and external forces from the surface, including weather patterns, have little effect, leaving the environment responsive only to long-term processes. Movement here is minimal, with water flows that exist as slow, continuous motions, often moving in consistent directions for long periods, redistributing water gradually without creating turbulence. As depth increases further, the ocean becomes increasingly uniform, with conditions changing so slowly that they are difficult to detect without long-term measurement. And this consistency defines the deep environment. Another layer extends below this region, characterized by even greater stability, where pressure continues to rise in the same predictable way. Temperature remains nearly constant, and there are no daily or seasonal cycles to influence conditions, meaning this part of the ocean does not experience variation on human timescales, and what exists here today will remain similar for very long periods of time. Below this, the deepest parts of the ocean floor form narrow regions associated with trenches, limited in size, yet following the same physical principles as the rest of the deep ocean, where even here, nothing behaves differently in kind. Pressure increases, temperature remains stable, and the water continues to surround everything evenly. These deepest regions are not separate environments, but extensions of the same system, introducing no new forces or unfamiliar conditions. Throughout all of these layers, the defining feature is consistency. As light fades gradually, pressure increases steadily, movement slows, and there is no sudden drop, collapse, or transition that requires attention. The names used to describe these layers are simply tools for understanding rather than indicators of change, helping organize observation without altering the nature of the ocean itself, which is why there is no need to remember the names or distinctions, as they are not essential to the experience of this story. What matters instead is the pattern. As distance from the surface increases, external influence decreases, and stability becomes more pronounced, with each layer sharing and quietly continuing this pattern without interruption. As the ocean extends downward, it does so without urgency, with no destination to reach and no final point to arrive at. As the water remains water, the environment remains continuous, and conditions change only in degree rather than in nature. These descriptions can remain distant and do not need to be followed closely, and if attention drifts away, the structure remains intact, because the ocean does not depend on being observed or understood, and its layers exist whether they are named or not, creating, through this steady structure, a setting that is predictable, quiet, and unchanging, allowing the mind to rest within the repetition of slow, consistent conditions. Within these stable layers of the ocean, life continues to exist, not in large numbers or concentrated areas, but in forms adapted to conditions that remain consistent over time. Life in the deep ocean does not resemble life at the surface, as it does not depend on sunlight and photosynthesis, which shapes most surface ecosystems, is not a primary process here. Instead, organisms rely on other sources of energy that are available in small, steady amounts. These organisms are not active in the way surface animals often appear to be, with movement limited, energy conserved, and actions occurring slowly and only when necessary. Not because the environment is harsh, but because efficiency is required in a place where resources are evenly distributed, yet not abundant. As a result, life here is adapted to use very little energy over long periods of time. Many deep-sea organisms have structures that differ from those found near the surface, not as dramatic adaptations, but as gradual adjustments that allow them to exist within stable pressure, temperature, and low light conditions. One feature observed in some deep-sea species is the ability to produce light, a phenomenon known as bioluminescence, which results from a chemical reaction within the organism's tissues. This light does not illuminate the environment or function like a light source, but appears as brief, localized emissions serving specific purposes, such as attracting prey or signaling presence, remaining subtle, appearing only when needed, and not altering the overall darkness of the surrounding water. Not all deep-sea organisms produce light, and many do not rely on vision at all, instead using other senses such as sensitivity to movement or chemical changes in the water, adaptations that do not imply heightened awareness, but simply reflect long-term exposure to a stable environment. The distribution of life in the deep ocean is not uniform, as some areas contain more organisms due to nutrients that slowly settle from above, moving downward over time and providing a steady input of material in a gradual process that does not occur in bursts or create sudden increases in activity. Life responds slowly to the availability of resources, and deep-sea organisms do not experience rapid change, as their environment remains largely the same from one day to the next and from one season to another, leading growth and reproduction to occur at slower rates than at the surface, with life cycles extending over longer periods without urgency. There is no competition in the usual sense, as interactions between organisms are infrequent, encounters are rare, and when they occur, they are brief and limited, because the deep ocean does not support large populations living close together, but individual organisms distributed across wide areas, each existing within its own space. These organisms do not shape the environment in noticeable ways, do not alter currents or change temperature, and exist within conditions that remain unchanged by their presence, allowing the deep ocean to retain its overall consistency, as life does not introduce instability but adapts to what already exists. There is no need to imagine complex ecosystems or dynamic interactions, as the structure remains simple, with energy arriving slowly and life responding gradually. And like the layers of the ocean itself, life in the deep presents no sharp distinctions or dramatic contrasts, remaining subdued even and steady. These descriptions do not need to be held in memory or interpreted, and can remain in the background, like the environment they describe, as the presence of life in the deep ocean does not change the overall character of this place, which remains quiet, stable, and continuous over long periods of time. And as these observations settle, there is nothing further to attend to, because the environment does not respond to being noticed and continues without interruption, maintaining its steady conditions far below the surface. At this point, there is nothing more that needs to be added, as the environment has already been described and its conditions have been laid out, gently, without urgency and without requiring attention. The deep ocean does not change quickly, And as distance from the surface increases, the influence of light, movement, and variation fades, leaving only consistency, with pressure continuing at the same steady rate, temperature remaining nearly unchanged, and movement slowing until it is barely noticeable. These conditions do not shift from moment to moment, but simply hold, and life within this environment adapts to that steadiness, not by reacting, but by remaining aligned with what already exists, with nothing pushing against the surroundings or attempting to alter them. This stability is not fragile, does not depend on balance being maintained, and exists in the same way regardless of observation. There is no rhythm here that needs to be followed, no cycle to track, and no signal that marks the passing of time. And without light to define day or night, the environment settles into a continuous state that does not require awareness, monitoring, or presence. As these ideas repeat, they introduce nothing new, returning to the same points slowly and evenly as depth increases, external influence decreases, and conditions stabilize in patterns that do not change or develop, but simply continue. There is no reason to imagine movement here, or to picture descent or direction, as distance from the surface is only a measurement rather than an action, with nothing falling or sinking, and everything remaining supported by the same surrounding water, evenly distributed. The deep ocean does not feel enclosed, compressing, or constraining, but maintains the same conditions in all directions at once. And this uniformity removes the need for adjustment or response, leaving nothing to anticipate, nothing to prepare for, and no outcome toward which the environment progresses. It does not arrive at a conclusion, but simply remains. As the story continues, the details already described do not need to be recalled, and can soften and become less distinct, as pressure, light, temperature, and life fade into a single, consistent setting, without edges or transitions. There is no sequence to follow now, and no structure to hold in place, as the descriptions no longer move forward, but rest. And the deep ocean does not require engagement or invite interpretation, existing independently of attention. If awareness drifts, nothing changes, and if the words become distant, nothing is lost, as the same conditions remain quietly and continuously, far below the surface. There is no need to stay with the story, as it does not rely on being heard or remembered, and everything that needed to be said has already settled into place, with nothing more needing to follow. As the sound of this voice continues, it does so without expectation, direction, or purpose beyond presence, while the deep environment remains steady, unchanging, and unaffected. And as these steady conditions repeat, they no longer carry information, becoming part of the background and blending into silence, into rest, and into the space where attention naturally softens, leaving nothing left to notice or consider. Only a consistent, quiet setting, continuing on its own, as the body rests and the mind no longer needs to remain awake. There is nothing more to explain now, as the environment has already settled into its steady form, with nothing changed and nothing expected to change, while the deep ocean continues without direction or intention, and its conditions remain the same, held in place by distance, consistency, and time. There is no moment to arrive at, and no ending to reach, as what exists simply continues quietly and evenly, with pressure remaining constant, temperature not shifting, and movement minimal. And where movement does exist, it is slow enough to go unnoticed. These details no longer need to be separate or named, as they can merge into a single, unchanging background. The deep environment does not respond to attention or absence, remaining the same whether it is observed or not. And there is no need to remain with the words, as they do not carry instructions or require understanding. If the sound becomes distant, that is natural, and if awareness fades, nothing is lost, because the ocean does not wait, react, or pause, but continues in the same way it always has and always will, through long stretches of time that do not need to be measured. Nothing here depends on effort or requires participation, and the descriptions no longer introduce ideas or move forward, but remain still, repeating only what is already present. There is no contrast left to notice, and no variation to follow, as the environment has become uniform. As the voice continues, it does so without emphasis, direction, or intention, with words that are not leading anywhere, simply present, then less present, and then no longer distinct. The deep ocean remains unchanged, not moving toward an outcome or resolving into anything else, but existing as it is, steady and uninterrupted. There is no need to hold on to any part of this. Nothing needs to be remembered, and nothing needs to be completed, as the setting remains quiet, not because it has become quieter, but because nothing interrupts it. As attention softens, the descriptions lose their edges and blend into the same background they describe, with the ocean not fading, only awareness doing so. And as the night continues on its own, the steady conditions remain far below the surface, unchanged, unnoticed, and complete in themselves.